if you think about energy and the climate being one of the major threats to humanity, so too is the loss of what it means to be human and the loss of the ability to think freely, right? One of my colleagues and friends, she refers to this as cognitive capital, right? The erosion of cognitive capital or brain capital is a national security threat as well. And so too is cognitive warfare and the extent to which, different countries can interfere with the cognitive well-being of an entire other populace. One of the things that I think that we don't really fully appreciate collectively is how little advancement we've made in the treatment of neurological diseases and mental health and suffering. That overall physical health, like all of the metrics of physical health, show improvement over time, except for this category, which is so fundamental to what it means to be human, which is neurological health and well-being.
Are you human?
Hi, Nita. It's great to have you here.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
I've been following your work for quite some time, and it seems like it's a perfect moment for people finally start to listen to what we've been advocating for quite some time. We had a blind fascination of like the emerging tech, the Gen AI. People are thinking it's all great. It's going to help them to improve their lives and only the positives, right? But finally, people are starting to be aware about the downsides, meaning the loss of privacy and the dangers of influence on politics and voting, and surveillance and all the very tricky subjects. And I've been wondering what this year has been for you. How is your work, like getting attention?
Yeah. It's been an exciting year in that people, as you say, are finally really listening. They're understanding a lot of the implications. And they appreciate that I'm coming forward with a solution set, that I'm not just naming the problem, but I'm also helping people to understand, like, okay, what is it? If we were to look at the impact of social media on our brain and mental experience, if we're to look at the risks of manipulation and disinformation, if we look at the advertising economy and how it is nudging and shaping our behavior, or the emerging, role of generative AI and powering neurotechnology to interface with the brain, like, what is the problem and how do we realign the technology to really appreciate the upside potential? And so, I've been advocating for this concept of cognitive liberty for a long time, the right to self-determination over our brain and mental experiences. But finally, people are like, right, that's the thing. That's the problem, right? And that's the solution, which is, of course, we need those set of rights. And how do we realize it? And so, it's for the first time, it's very easy to explain to people, and it's very and people quickly move to saying, okay, great, I'm in. And how do we realize this? How do we make it happen? That's an exciting moment, because I think in the past, most people have been, either sort of passive about it. Oh, it's not such a big deal. Or I like having personalized entertainment or personalized advertisements and feeds, to suddenly being like, wow, this is a real problem and we need a real solution to it. And it's urgent that we do something about it.
Because there are some governments, some countries, which are already quite infiltrating, our personal space, our brains, if you may.
That's right. I mean, I think people are starting to understand the downside potential of a surveillance state, right? And to your point, there are already governments who are misusing the technology in ways that are frightening and problematic, and that's both against their own individual citizens, but also, in election interference and attempting to, have massive misinformation campaigns. You look at everything from Russia, Ukraine to Israel and Gaza and the widening Middle East conflict. And you see massive disinformation campaigns to try to shape and change how people see things. And the power of generative AI coupled with social media to amplify those messages and to shape and change how we think and feel is really becoming quite profound. And then you add into that these AI chatbots and LLMs, the capacity of generating realistic images and videos and deepfakes, and then neurotechnology, where, all of the major tech companies are starting to launch products that give much more direct access to our brains. And suddenly it's a frightening moment in society, even while it has exciting upside potential.
Mm-hmm. And how do you see it being played out in the current, moment of elections in the US?
Well, I mean, so it's been interesting. A lot of the research suggests that for this election cycle, that people are already quite fixed in their beliefs and in their preferences. And so the likelihood that it's going to really shift votes, they think is less or lower. I'm not sure I completely believe that because, in the US, it's likely that the presidential election will be decided by a margin that's very small. And we'll see, right? It could be a landslide in one direction or another, but it's also quite likely that there are these, kind of margin voters, people who haven't fully made up their minds, where misinformation or disinformation or deepfakes, or even just really selective feeds that target and identify who those people are, and then pump them full of information could shape and change their views in ways that could lead to almost undetectable interference with elections. And I think that's the part that maybe people don't fully understand yet and don't fully appreciate yet is the extent to which we may not even know how much technology is influencing and changing our minds. And people have this belief that they have autonomy, that they are, the kind of master or mistress of their own minds.
Mm-hmm.
But that may not be true anymore. It may be that we are far more instrumented than we believe. And that even with elections, it could be more subtle and more powerful than people recognize as happening. And that it could be at the hands of foreign governments, that it's not even, political operatives within, the country I'm in, right? But in other countries that are seeking to shape and change it based on their own political, and national security and other interests.
Yeah. And I think the other big problem is that people are getting constantly stimulated. There are so much information going at them that there are some red flags, but they choose to ignore them.
That's absolutely right, which is, we're in this, distraction economy too, where people are used to and think that it's okay that they're addicted to their technology, that they are constantly having notifications that prevent them from being able to pay attention, that they are, being sucked in to technology. Studies show that, younger people like teens are almost constantly online, and that the average adult checks one of their devices, like a mobile device, at least once every 10 minutes. And that, kind of inability to disconnect and inability to pay attention or have sustained attention, it means that, the capacity to even recognize how profound a shaping is happening. You need the ability to pay attention to a news article or a message to even have the ability to change your mind, to shape your mind. So I think you're right, which is the power of the distraction economy has really overwhelmed people's capacity to think freely.
Yeah. And then you have the neurotechnology and the further invasion in our minds. That's something which you've been working on for quite some time. And I started reading your book. I haven't finished, but it's amazing. It's actually really great. I just need to find time.
Of course, that's right. The whole point, right? People have a very hard time actually getting through entire books these days. So.
Yeah, but no, it is great. It's I think one of the very few areas, very few spaces where you can actually disconnect. You can get immersed, you can get sucked in the story. But you talked a little bit about the cognitive liberty, and you also spoke about it on your TED Talk. And how do you envision fighting for cognitive liberty in terms of legal area?
It's a good question. So, I see cognitive liberty as sort of the guiding principle that we need in the modern era. And as a starting place, what I advocate for in the book is updating our understanding of an interrelated set of human rights that I think comprise cognitive liberty. And so that's self-determination, which we've traditionally understood in the human rights context as really being about collective and political rights rather than, the sort of individual right to self-determination. And I think there's no reason why we can't and shouldn't update our understanding of that to say, really, what's fundamental to human dignity, what's fundamental to the capacity to be human is self-determination. And we need to recognize that as a fundamental human right. Privacy is already an existing human right, but the concept of mental privacy is one that people are starting to recognize is increasingly important. And that's everything from the automatic processes in your brain, right? Just things like how you react emotionally or cognitively to anything that you see in the world, to the more complex thoughts and images in your mind, which brings us to freedom of thought, long recognized as an absolute human right, but primarily it's been applied to the concept of religious liberty and freedom of belief in that context. And I think we need to recognize now that freedom of thought includes a right against interference and manipulation and punishment for our thoughts. Human rights are an essential place to start because it sets the global norm and standard. But then human rights are only as good as the national laws that people implement to actually recognize and to see them through. And so then I think we have to look at both recognizing those rights, whether that's in constitutions and interpretations of constitutions, or in context-specific areas. So one area that I dive into deeply in the book is the workplace and the increasing use of neurotechnology in the workplace, or, more broadly, surveillance technology in the workplace. And there, I think, recognizing mental privacy in the workplace requires specific, data privacy rights for workers. And this means, implementing best practices and principles that we see have long been recognized by the OECD, like data minimization and purpose limitation and legitimate use, and saying, kind of flipping the narrative to say that the right to data privacy, at least with mental privacy, exists with the employee, and then the employer has to justify with purpose-based legitimate justifications when they need access to anything that interferes with mental privacy, like fatigue levels of employees, or, very rarely will attention be relevant, but maybe, you could find a legitimate purpose for monitoring attention if it's somebody who's doing something that's safety related, like attention to heavy machinery or something like that. And then likewise, I think that requires national laws in areas like education and, rights to freedom of thought of students. That's going to be quite difficult, but also expansive and important in areas like you start to see banning books happening a lot in the US and other countries, and academic freedom being threatened, the freedom of press being interfered with. And these are all areas that are impacted by cognitive liberty and those broader set of rights. So, I think recognizing cognitive liberty is going to require a lot of work with respect to updating our laws and rights. And then a lot of work in setting into place the right incentives for technology companies to start to implement these by design into their products so that there are greater rights for individuals rather than the kind of extractive economy that we live within.
Do you think it's going to be incentives or maybe prevention in terms of getting fined if they don't provide that?
I think it's both, right? I mean, I think what you need is you need sticks and carrots. If you look, one of the analogies that I think is helpful to consider is, the growing development of alternative energy sources. If you look at a lot of traditional energy companies, they had very little incentive to actually invest in alternative energy. Like suddenly ExxonMobil wasn't going to be like, let me, instead of drilling for oil, start to develop alternative energy, right? And there's both fines. There are laws that say things like, here's the, max caps on emissions and other kinds of standards. And then there were a lot of incentives, right? And this is from everything like tax incentives and tax credits to public-private partnerships and investments where there are like large government contracts and funds that you could go after in order to develop alternative energy. And I think that's what we need is, if you think about energy and the climate being one of the major threats to humanity, so too is the loss of what it means to be human and the loss of the ability to think freely, right? One of my colleagues and friends, she refers to this as cognitive capital, right? The erosion of cognitive capital or brain capital is a national security threat as well. And so too is cognitive warfare and the extent to which, different countries can interfere with the cognitive well-being of an entire other populace. And so that's where incentives, I think, from governments to both shift tech companies, but to invest in cultivating cognitive liberty in its populace will be crucial and essential.
At what stage is it right now?
I think what we're seeing is that there's promise. There are movements afoot. So, there are bits and pieces, but I recently published an article with some colleagues in the journal Neuron called Beyond Neural Data, Cognitive Biometrics and Privacy. And we did a really broad survey of all of the laws that are starting to get adopted around the concept of mental privacy. And so you see in countries like, especially in Latin America. So, there's some movements in countries like Chile and Brazil and Mexico where there are adoption of specific rights around the protection of mental integrity and mental privacy. In the US, there have been a couple of states like Colorado and California that have started to adopt specific privacy protections around data that's gathered from the brain. There are major organizations like the Uniform Laws Commission, the American Law Institute, and the European Law Institute that are starting to develop model laws for states and countries to adopt. UNESCO had this very large process where they've adopted or they've issued the draft around the ethics of neurotechnology that's really quite expansive, that looks at the concepts of mental privacy and freedom of thought and self-determination and advocates for specific rights and specific regulations and incentives to be put into place. And that's going through the political process right now with the 194 member countries, and ideally will be adopted as a global standard in November of 2025. So, I'd say there's a lot of movement in the right direction, but we're at the early stages still, right? And so the EU AI Act, for example, has specific regulations with respect to manipulation, but it's quite narrow. The GDPR has some, rights and regulations that also pertain to collection of personal data pertaining to mental privacy, but it's more procedural rather than substantive in terms of its protection. So we're moving in the right direction, but we still have a lot of work to do to recognize collectively the importance of cognitive liberty. And at the same time, the technology is accelerating, right? And the capabilities of the technology are accelerating. And so, we're at kind of a critical moment, I'd say, where the technology is outpacing the very good, but more slow-moving process of adopting both rights and regulations. And then more importantly, I think pairing that with the right set of incentives to start to shift tech companies, especially as they, issue increasingly more powerful generative AI foundational models, and then move into this area of neurotechnology where brain centers are integrated into, all kinds of devices, giving even more powerful capabilities to companies and to governments worldwide.
It's interesting that what you mentioned the AI Act. It's right now in the area of AI. It seems so much fragmented.
Sorry.
Okay, maybe he wants to add something to the subject.
Come here.
Oh, so sweet. Yeah, looks like coconut.
Yeah.
Oh, so sweet. So wait. Yes. So the AI Act and the whole regulation of AI technology is very much fragmented, and it seems there are some voices that you over-regulated some bits, and in some ways it favors large organizations because there is more monopoly going to be created, or it is as it is, and the small players, the new, the startups who want to challenge the status quo won't risk it because they simply cannot afford any legal action.
It's an important first step, right? And one of the challenges with the EU AI Act is that kind of quickly, the EU tried to take what was an AI Act that was really pre-generative AI, right? It was more focused on issues of bias and outcomes and less on, the training of foundational models, and then to pivot it to have it be more about the foundational models. But at a stage where I don't think that we had a full and good understanding of the models and how to regulate based on risk. So some of the early concepts of, kind of what constitutes a high risk model versus a low risk model, having compute thresholds or, training data thresholds as the way of thinking about it may quickly be outdated. And to your point, may also favor the existing players, which are, very large players and prevent smaller entrants into the market. And so, it both might overregulate in preventing companies from being able to enter the market maybe with safer or better alternatives that are more aligned with human flourishing, and to favor the existing tech companies, while also frustrating innovation in a space where innovation might be critical, especially for having models that are, again, designed not to just be confident or not to be human sounding or, not to be so easily implemented in ways that could deceive human thinking. And so it's a good first try, but it might actually backfire in many important ways. And yet this is sort of the way Europe tends to regulate. The GDPR is, kind of quite broad and set a floor for how a lot of data processing happens. But in many ways, it only offers procedural rights rather than substantive rights. And it's backfired in some ways. Like we all deal with consent dialogues that we dismiss and find frustrating rather than having efficient ways of actually implementing our preferences or, preventing companies from doing things that, generate more of an extractive economy. So I don't, I admire the effort to try to get out ahead of the problem. But anytime you try to be at the leading edge of the problem, it may, at the same time, backfire in some important ways too, and serve as a global lesson about how to regulate or how not to regulate in that space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's hope they keep updating.
I mean, that's the most important thing, right? Is the extent to which they focus on having it be adaptive and updating it, and to keep on top of how the models are evolving. Recognizing that increasingly these are multimodal models, that they have, increasing autonomy and agency, and that some of the risks might not be based on size, and that, focusing less on the front end of, regulation and more about the kinds of harms that are likely to result, and then trying to actually address the harms might be a useful direction in the future.
Yeah. Agreed. I don't know if you want me to talk about it, but you talk about it in the TED Talk. So in 2017, you experienced the trauma of losing a child and dealing with PTSD. And the therapies and methods you back then got weren't that effective. And now you discuss the potential of neurotechnology and the new tech that can change. It can revolutionize the mental health treatment. So, how do you see the new development? How can it change our approach to such illnesses?
One of the things that I think that we don't really fully appreciate collectively is how little advancement we've made in the treatment of neurological diseases and mental health and suffering. That overall physical health, like all of the metrics of physical health, show improvement over time, except for this category, which is so fundamental to what it means to be human, which is neurological health and well-being. So I suffered from pretty significant PTSD after the loss of our child, where, it really got to the point that I was in many ways dysfunctional. Like I couldn't sleep well. I couldn't close my eyes without experiencing the PTSD again. And, tried sort of every form of therapy and really wasn't able to make a lot of progress. Over time, I finally did, work to be able to use both a pairing of neurofeedback, which is to be able to visualize like stress and anxiety building up, together with a more kind of traditional exposure therapy. So I would, kind of relive the memory, but a lot of traditional PTSD therapy is that you allow the memory to kind of come back, and then in many ways stop fearing experiencing it. And so you learn to modulate the kind of stress and anxiety. And eventually when I was able to do that, I was able to have it become more like a painful memory, like any painful memory, rather than, the kind of suffering of PTSD. Modern therapies, like the ability to see what's happening in the brain, even just neurofeedback, is revolutionary in many ways, because what it enables us to do is to start to literally be able to see it. Like you might feel anxious, but you don't see the evidence of it. And being able to, see your heart rate increasing, or see, this is what the pattern of neural activity looks like every time that you experience the memory, and then be able to literally see it changing as you relax. Those are powerful insights that we've been lacking up until now in many ways. And I talk about DECNEF, which is, a more cutting edge version of this, which is decoded neurofeedback. It's a way of doing this with functional magnetic resonance imaging, where, the pattern of activity can be retrained explicitly to change a memory and have it associated with something like playing a video game or a more pleasant experience, which can be both faster and less painful for somebody to be able to overwrite that memory. That's one of many examples, right? I mean, there are, whether it's PTSD or depression, or, one of the technologies that I think is incredible is people who suffer from essential tremor or Parkinson's disease. Drugs are generally ineffective because they sort of bathe the brain and they're not targeted and specific. But there are already FDA approved products from a company called Takela Health that reads the precise neural activity as it comes down the wrists to, the motor neuron activity that leads to the tremor, and then send back an inhibitory response to that neural activity so that it stops the tremor just with a wearable neurotechnology device. And they're investigating the capability of doing that for areas like depression and mental health as well. And that, like the precision of being able to see, like, here's what's happening in the brain when we're suffering from a particular kind of experience, whether it's PTSD, whether it's depression, whether it is Parkinson's or essential tremor, and being able to have much more precise and targeted therapy that's much more effective is exciting. And so I look at this technology and I say, look, there is extraordinary upside potential, both to be able to discover what's happening in our brains and have precise and targeted therapy that would be so much more effective for this area that is fundamental to our experience of being human. Mm-hmm. And imagine if that's where we put our effort, right? And that's where we put our research and our dollars, rather than to neuromarketing, designed to precisely understand our brains so that they can be manipulated into buying more products for a consumption economy, or so that we can be more addicted to platforms like TikTok, right? So how do we do that? How do we realize a world in which the research dollars go into PTSD and depression and neurological health and well-being, and not into addicting us to social media and into fueling more advertising dollars to have us buy more for a consumption economy?
Yeah, but in so many ways, it makes sense to incentivize, to fund those research institutes, because it costs money. It costs government money to treat those people, and these illnesses are sometimes lifelong.
I agree, but instead of seeing an increase in funding by governments in a lot of these spaces, what we're seeing is a decrease in funding. Like in the U.S., the U.S. Brain Initiative just suffered a huge cut in its funding by the government. And, you would think, like, of course, governments should be funding neurological disease and suffering, treatments. If they look at the growing toll of dementia and of, these advanced neurological diseases that are both costly to governments, but costly to societies and costly to individuals, like, we have every reason in the world to put our money there. But technology companies, for the most part, are putting their money into, rather than neurological health and well-being, things like neuromarketing. The one thing that gives me hope that there will be a lot of investment, at least private investment in this space, is it's probably the biggest untapped market for companies to really profit off of, in that, pharmaceuticals are very generalized, but the more that generative AI enables that, like, a product could be tuned to an individual without having, a company having to, do studies on every single person, but have a product that could be broadly sold, but customized to each individual to be able to treat their own neurological disease and suffering. I think companies are going to be incentivized to prioritize, in some ways, neurological health and well-being, because there are so many people who suffer from it, and there are so many people who'd be willing to buy products that would treat it.
And it's like this topic, especially about the depression, brings into mind the book of it's him, Walker, Matthew, Why We Sleep. Why, like, there are so many fundamental things which we kind of forgot. I guess maybe because we are overstimulated and we keep feeling that we don't have enough time, so we lose on sleep, which is fundamental. And I'm sure some of the research in this area.
Yeah,
as well.
It's really interesting, right? So if you look at the impact of technology on sleep disturbance, right, even just the light, or the overstimulation of the brain, or the fact that a lot of the really powerful research on this looks at kids and how kids in general are sleeping fewer hours per night than they used to, and are having increasing sleep disturbances. And this isn't just because they're on social media until late at night, although that's part of it. It's, that it turns out that whatever is happening as they spend more and more time on device is leading to increased wake-ups during the night and increased sleep disturbance, which then is correlated with all kinds of health implications, right? From, general health, from the immune system, to decreases and, increases in areas like depression and loneliness and other kind of mental health problems, but also things like decreasing test scores and overall cognitive performance, because sleep is so essential to everything, right? From the ability to consolidate memories to the ability to be able to flourish in kind of any different capacity. So the sleep disturbances are really quite profound. And it's interesting because that's an area that a lot of neurotech companies are starting to focus on, which is both offering particular products that track sleep and try to do things like help you sleep better. Doing, like, there's a headband that's AI and neurotech, integration, where what it does is it reads your particular pattern of sleep and then uses audio to try to lull you back to sleep, or, kind of help you have more core sleep and deep sleep over the course of the night. But then there are other companies that are looking to take that same data and to figure out the stage of sleep when you are most susceptible to advertisements, and then use dream sleep advertising as a way to try to manipulate you in your most vulnerable state. So, the problem with any technology is there's both the profound possibility, right? Which is like, learn about sleep patterns and use that to improve sleep, to learn about sleep patterns and understand when you're the most suggestible, and then try to advertise to you.
Yeah. But why would a person agree to being sold during their sleep?
They might not, right? They might not agree to it, but they might be susceptible to it anyway. So, the kind of scenario that I imagine is, you have one of these devices like an Amazon Echo that is in your bedroom, and it's paired together with, all the rest of your smart home devices, including whatever your earbuds are that you're sleeping with. And it's another advertising spot that is sold, and it's, while you're sleeping, these devices are integrated with each other and you're advertised to while you sleep. And so, you assume that somebody has to consent, as opposed to, I'm worried that there's no law that prevents that kind of advertisement from happening. And so I agree with you. If we have a right to consent or a right not to consent, right, and that it is a prohibited activity without our consent, I would hope most people wouldn't agree to it. But if it's not an option for us, right, if it's not a choice, then the only choice you have is to start to say, the products that I have in my home, like, the Amazon Echo or other products that are useful for me in other capacities, I have to remove because of the, capability of those products to target me for advertisement. And that's not such a far-fetched thing to think about. A lot of people who have these devices in their homes report suddenly being advertised about things that they discussed in the home that they never typed, that they never, just did anything other than having a conversation about. And so the devices can often be listening in ways that people don't expect, because, part of their user agreements are that they're able to use all of that data for
no one
advertisements.
Reads. No. Yeah. Wow. Crazy. Do you have a smart home? Not
really. No. But I do have mobile devices. Like I have an iPhone, and I generally think Apple does a better job than most other companies with respect to privacy. But that is a device that is listening and tracking me at all times as well. And so, having to put my trust in a company like Apple that they're not misusing or selling that data or using it for purposes beyond what I've consented to. But no, my home is kind of dumb.
Yeah, same. Like I got some gifts, like Amazon Echo, and then no,
I'm not interested in Amazon Echo, or I think there's a Google version of it as well. And
yes,
I'm not interested in those devices.
Yeah, because it's like you said, like you have to make a conscious effort to understand, because it's being sold in a beautiful way, right, all the benefits you can get, but of course there's a like the other side,
right? Well, and the problem is it's not like it's granular consent, right? So it's not like you could go through and set up all of your preferences and say, I want to use it so that I can set up my grocery list, but I want it turned off during these hours, or not listening in the following ways, or filtering out sensitive conversations, right? If there was more granular options like that, maybe I would consider it. I probably still wouldn't, because I wouldn't trust the companies to be in my home.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, I can imagine a kind of privacy by design where there are more preferences and our consent is not like allow or not allow, right? It's not just allow or deny like a binary choice, but it actually gives you the power to make more sophisticated choices that align your privacy preferences with how the products are deployed in your life.
Maybe a good thing about the Gen AI and the whole, speech to text, text to speech technology is that maybe we will be able to set those things up in a much smoother way.
I hope so, right? I mean, increasingly, if we could have, just a plug-in to our browsers that, we could in advance set up and say, like, here are all of my privacy preferences, right? And then every time you interact with a website, it automatically would set all of those preferences for you. And that at the other end, the companies were required to be able to communicate with that kind of, browser extension, and
like
that they had to set their privacy, in a granular way that accepted your interactions. Yes, that would be great. But that's, when we were talking about GDPR earlier and the EU AI Act, that's where, I feel like if that's what they did, if they required more technological innovation to enable user preferences to be reflected in ways that weren't so annoying for the consumer, we wouldn't become just normalized to, an annoying pop-up that we just hit deny and don't actually read and understand. And we could feel more empowered because, we could say, like, yeah, I'm willing to spend, 15 minutes, an hour, whatever it is, one time to express all of my preferences, and then have that be, my like digital avatar
Gatekeeper.
for how I interact with the rest of the world.
Yeah. That's one thing to advocate for.
Yes. Okay.
So how can we balance this, the potential benefits of the neurotechnology with the right to mental privacy?
How do we balance the benefits with the rights? Is that so? I mean, that's one of the nice things about privacy protections, I think, is that they're not absolute rights, right? They are relative rights, and I don't believe that we should, always prioritize individual rights over societal interest. I think that societal interest, I think we exist in relationship to one another, and that recognizing that relational autonomy and relational rights is really crucial. And so, if you think about the benefits of neurotechnology, one of the examples I go into in my book is, this example of thinking about a truck driver, where a truck driver, a commercial truck driver, is really driving a very powerful instrument on the road that, if driven carefully, is great. It helps us transport things from one place to the next. But if a person is tired at the wheel, that's one of the leading causes of accidents on the road is fatigue levels, not even drunkenness. And so what if we could track their fatigue levels more effectively? Now, one of the ways that this happens is that there's oftentimes like in-cab cameras that are focused on the truck driver. And that to me is a significant invasion of privacy. Like everything they're doing in their cab is being, videotaped versus if the thing we really want to know is, are they falling asleep at the wheel or not? You could use neurotechnology to pick up the precise pattern of neural activity and even earlier than a camera could start to see that they're getting tired and give them alerts and, give their employer alerts and, make all of us safer. Now, the way that you balance that is you say, okay, that's a good innovation, right? That could really help us, but we should only be collecting fatigue levels, right? If you're monitoring a person's brain activity, you can derive a particular inference, which is fatigue levels, but you shouldn't be collecting the raw data that allows for far more inferences about what they're thinking or feeling or anything else that's going on in their brain at the same time. That data should be collected on device and should be overwritten on device, right? The only thing we need to know is fatigue level in the moment. We don't need to track it over time to see if they're suffering from cognitive decline. We just need the precise information in the moment. So mental privacy versus innovation would say, first, you recognize that there is a societal interest here that might be more powerful than the individual interest to mental privacy. But second, you focus on doing it in a way that enables and recognizes that there is a whole bunch more intrusive information that you could gather from the person's brain at the same time. And you don't do that, right? You don't collect all of the rest of that information. You do it by design. And so I think we start to say, like, it's important to invest in good use cases that help all of us flourish, but we need privacy by design to be implemented to balance and to recognize mental privacy, and not just mental privacy for the individual, but the balance of when mental privacy is something that should be respected, when it should be balanced in ways that protect the individual as well, and society as well.
Like we've talked about people being addicted, especially teenagers, to social media, particularly TikTok, how they developed algorithms to just keep scrolling and not even serving us the things we choose, but things they think we want, we like, right? It's a complete flip.
Not even things that they think that we like, but they think that we should like. And so they are programming us to care about
programming
it.
us, exactly. Yeah. And Instagram, like the rivals are doing the same. So the same mechanisms are now being deployed as well in Gen AI. And like you said, sometimes the whole like misinformation, manipulation, and deep fakes influence the way we think and the way we act. So how can we prevent that? Like, we want to get the like a normal citizen, right, who is not maybe so technical. How can she know to get the best out of the technology, while being aware that it may not be the truth?
Yeah, it's really hard, to be honest, right? And putting the burden on an individual, or even the ask on an individual to get the benefits is both challenging and may not be the right place to put the burden, right? And so, I think how an individual does it right now is to start to cultivate the core aspects of cognitive liberty in order to safeguard themselves against the downside risks. And what I mean by that is, it turns out the better your interoceptive capabilities are, and that's your connection between mind and body, like your ability to sense your body, the more you are resilient against manipulation by technology. And I'll unpack that in a moment. The second kind of category of that is kind of mental agility, your critical thinking skills, your ability to, have the mental agility you need to work through issues and to understand issues. And the third category is developing and improving your relational autonomy, your relationship between self and others. So on interoception, what that means is, one area that people have started to lose is their ability to kind of sense their own body, their ability to sense their own heart rate, sense their own hunger. A lot of cues have been turned off by technology. Like, a simple exercise for somebody is to think about, if you wake up first thing in the morning, are you more likely to check your phone before you go to the bathroom? You probably need to go to the bathroom, right? But people sort of turn off those cues and focus on technology rather instead. And a really simple technique to improve that is meditation. Just 5 minutes of meditation a day improves your ability of body scanning. And the reason that's helpful is right now people do automatically have some sense of like hesitation when you're interacting with generative AI, some sense of doubt, some gut instincts, right? But if that's turned off, your ability to be resilient against manipulation is decreased. And so doing that meditation helps you reconnect to body. And then you have to trust your gut instinct. Like, this feels off, right? And then you use the critical thinking skills and you say, okay, before I share this information, I'm going to spend a second looking at who shared it? What's the source of it? Does something seem off about it, right? And if you pause and exercise those critical thinking skills because you have this sense that it's off, then you're less likely to be manipulated and you're less likely to share disinformation and misinformation. And then relational autonomy is starting to better understand your relationship to yourself, your relationship to technology, and your relationship to other people, and to take responsibility for that, right? And to say, I am part of this ecosystem of sharing disinformation and misinformation, And so recognizing your place in the world helps you start to take more responsibility for being able to change it and to change the direction of it. So I think that's part of what people can do. I again, go back to, we need to empower people with things like badging and, watermarking, a lot of obligations on companies to give us the tools to be able to discern misinformation from, factual information. But exercising those basic skills of cultivating cognitive liberty in yourself can help you have the resilience to safeguard against misinformation as well.
Yeah. So looking ahead, how do you envision the adoption of neurotechnology and in the area of and the aspect of cognitive liberty? How will it, you think, change our understanding of consciousness and free will, and our identity as humans?
Not sure that it will change that much on free will. And here's why, which is it will at least shore up and help support the concept of like a materialist or reductionist view of the brain, right? Which is to say, mental processes that you are experiencing are not magical and just metaphysical. Like they have a representation in the physical neurons and firings in the brain. And that will surprise some people to see that like thoughts and things that they experience, not as physical, but as, sort of metaphysical, have a physical correlate. But that doesn't exclude the possibility of there also being a kind of spiritual dimension or other dimension, right? And so I don't think it will disprove a world where people might believe in something different, but it will show that there is a physical aspect which will change how people think about, I think, self and thoughts and their experience of thoughts. But again, I don't think it excludes this whole other world. So I don't think it, necessarily changes things in that way. But people will start to see consciousness as not a magical thing, but a physical thing. And that might, change how people view themselves. Even, your ability to check and test your assumptions. Like a lot of, here's a simple example. Sometimes I might think that I'm tired, right? But the physical correlates show I'm hungry. Like people misunderstand their own cues sometimes, right? Or I might think I'm really angry, but it turns out that my anger is driven by the fact that I'm hungry, right? And sometimes like seeing those physical cues might change your own experience of self. Or, a different example is like you might believe you're not biased in some ways, but you start to see how your brain reacts to, faces of different colors or information that's associated. That can change your own sense of self as well. So sometimes physical evidence about what people have experienced just through kind of our own internal access to self may shift our own understanding of self, and it may shift our, belief in ways that might surprise people over time as they discover more about themselves. That will, I think, shape us and change us, and sometimes in good ways and sometimes in bad ways, because, who knows if that's fully accurate and fully representative. And so, you might come to over rely on or second guess your own self based on what the data shows, and that might be good and it might be wrong. And your own sense of self might be far more complex than technology can represent. But people might start to shortcut that process of self-discovery by relying on what the data shows instead.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So in general, do you see it as a positive thing, the whole development, or you have more worries than?
I'd say I'm cautiously optimistic. And the reason I'm cautiously optimistic is that I do think that the upside potential is extraordinary, right? The ability to finally put neurological health and well-being, as a kind of pivotal priority in society, to me is incredibly exciting. And even just giving people access to their own brain and their own capability of tracking their brain health and wellness, to me is extraordinarily promising. But I think the downside risks are just as powerful, if not even more so. Like the interference with freedom of thought and mental privacy is so profound. And those right. Like the space of mental reflection is so fundamental to what it means to be human and to have the capacity for self-actualization. And the temptation for companies and governments to interfere with that is so powerful that I say I'm cautiously optimistic, because I think people collectively will make the right choices to steer the technology in a way that realizes that upside potential and limits the downside risk. But right?
And the world needs more people like you who are fighting for the right thing, to the right way to utilize technology, such powerful technology. So thank you so much for doing what you are doing, and thank you so much for this conversation, and speak to you soon, hopefully.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for all you do to educate the world about these things.
Thank you. I'm trying to do my small
You're
bit.
doing a great job of it, and I'm grateful for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye, Nita.
Bye.